Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will talk about the HOA that put up a fence inside my land. I was elbow deep in raspberry canes, dripping sweat and humming along with the cicadas, when I heard the metallic rasp that would shove my quiet life off a cliff. From the back of my 5-acre lot, land my grandfather's deed swore was mine, to the eastern oak stake and no farther, came the grinding pitch of a post driver. I straightened, scratched my sunburned neck, and watched two workmen in matching orange shirts slam 6-foot steel posts into a line that sliced through my pasture like the world's worst haircut. At first I figured they'd lost their GPS. The subdivision's homeowners association liked to fuss over petty things. Mailbox colors, porch lights that burned past midnight, but nobody had ever marched onto my soil. Yet here they were, setting a fence dead center in my Timothy grass where my goats, Maple and Comet, were busy bleating protest. I jogged over, dust puffing from my jeans. "Afternoon," I called, waving like a friendly neighbor, though my pulse was drumming. "You gentlemen need directions?" The stockier guy, name tag said Cade, wiped sweat with his sleeve. "Nope, just following the plan. HOA expansion line. Everything behind this fence belongs to the Greenbelt now." The words hit like hail. My orchard, dozens of fruit trees I'd grafted myself, stood behind that imaginary line. So did my irrigation well, my fresh compost rows, and a dozen years of blistered palms. "That's my land," I said, forcing calm. "Survey and county plat both say so." Cade shrugged in that way people do when they hope you'll vanish. "Take it up with the board, sir. We got permits." The driver thudded again, earth shuddering at my feet. I walked the length of the shiny fence as it grew. Galvanized wire squares tall enough to keep elk out, and apparently me. A raw anger stirred. But anger without strategy is just noise. I snapped photos, measured the incursion exactly 128 feet inside my boundary, and called my neighbor, Lila, a retired title clerk who treated property lines like scripture. She listened, cursed under her breath, and promised coffee and advice at dawn. By nightfall, the fence was finished. It forked around my equipment shed and carved off 3 full acres. When the contractors left, they padlocked a gate on what used to be my driveway spur, dangling a fresh metal sign, HOA Greenbelt, no trespassing. The irony hurt more than the lock. I spent that night at the kitchen table with the original 1962 deed, 2 surveys, and an unopened beer. My granddad's spidery handwriting in the margins whispered that every inch had been paid for twice, once with money, once with sweat. I promised him right there under the humming fridge that I wasn't rolling over. Morning brought Lila, crisp legal pads in hand. We paced the new barrier while Maple and Comet watched like furry jurors. Lila tapped a post. They crossed the setback, 10 feet required from any agricultural structure. "That shed counts." She flipped pages. "Plus, they never recorded a boundary adjustment with the county. That makes this trespass, plain and simple." "HOA president won't care," I said. "Barrett thinks bylaws outrank state code. He's about to get educated." Lila's grin could peel paint. We drafted a cease and desist letter citing trespass, unlawful taking, and interference with livelihood under state agricultural protection statutes. She insisted we hand-deliver it at that evening's board meeting. Meanwhile, I phoned the county assessor. The clerk confirmed no boundary change, no easement filing, nothing. She even emailed me the parcel map with a polite "good luck." I spent the afternoon gathering proof. Drone photos of the pre-fence pasture, video of the posts being set, invoices showing lost hay sales because the goats couldn't graze. Each piece felt like ammunition in a battle I'd never asked for. At 6 sharp, we walked into the clubhouse, a faux colonial building the HOA guarded like Fort Knox. Barrett stood at the podium, khaki shorts, pastel polo, and the smug air of a man who'd never met a rule he didn't love. The room smelled of lemon floor polish and simmering discontent as other residents murmured about dues increases and pool schedules. When Barrett opened the floor, I stepped forward. "I'm here about the fence you dropped across my property yesterday." He smiled the way dentists do before the drill. "Ah, Jonah, good to see you." The board voted last month to expand the community greenbelt for the enjoyment of all residents. The land in question was reclassified as common area. "Without my consent, you can't reclassify anything." I laid the letter on the podium. "That fence is trespass. You've got 48 hours to remove it." Barrett's smile pinched. "Actually, Section 7.4 of our CCRs grants the HOA authority to appropriate underutilized parcels adjacent to common space. provided due notice. Your CCRs don't override state law, Lila cut in. The Agricultural Nuisance Act of 1995 protects existing farm operations from arbitrary zoning changes. You're in violation. The murmurs grew louder. Barrett adjusted his mic. We'll review council opinion. You do that, I said, and walked out before my temper escaped its leash. Outside, cicadas screamed. Think they'll fold? I asked Lila. Not a chance, she said. People like Barrett double down. She was right. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. Notice of special assessment. Apparently, I owed the HOA $8,000 to fund the Greenbelt improvement they'd stolen from me. Failure to pay within 30 days would result in a lien on my home. They had just transformed petty trespass into full-blown war. The first salvo was research. I spent nights burrowed in county archives, unearthing every document tied to my parcel since it left federal land in 1890. Turns out my property carried a century-old irrigation right recorded in language sterner than the Ten Commandments. Anyone obstructing access owed treble damages for lost crops. Treble. I felt a grin spread. Barrett had fenced off my well. Meanwhile, I hired a licensed surveyor, Alessio, who set bright pink flags along the true boundary. He also drafted a professional report stating that the HOA fence encroached by exactly 2.89 acres. I paid him a rush fee and worth every penny. Alessio's family had fought a pipeline easement once and won. He knew the drill. Second salvo, alliances. Neighbors whose backyards bordered the new Greenbelt were spitting mad when they learned their dues would spike for land they never asked for. Marissa, a school librarian with an intimidating spreadsheet hobby, started canvassing signatures to recall Barrett. Third salvo, optics. I invited the local paper's rural affairs reporter, the kind who loved David and Goliath pieces. He snapped photos of my half-fenced barn and interviewed Maple, who tried to eat his press pass. The headline 2 days later, Farmer Fights HOA Land Grab, circulated faster than lemonade in July. Public sympathy poured in. Barrett's counterpunch landed the following week. A notice citing me for unapproved livestock, now that, according to him, my acreage no longer met the 5-acre minimum the CCRs required for farm animals. He gave me 10 days to remove the goats or face daily fines of $100. It was a neat trap. Steal land, claim I was too small to keep goats, fine me into submission. Unfortunately for Barrett, he'd stepped on the wrong rake. I filed for a temporary restraining order in county court, armed with the survey, the irrigation deed, newspaper coverage, and a sworn affidavit from my veterinarian verifying Maple and Comet as therapy animals. An angle Lila suggested because HOA rules exempted service or therapy livestock. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Justice Lambert, granted the TRO in under an hour and scheduled a full hearing. The order commanded the HOA to halt all enforcement actions and, this part felt like a hug, refrain from further interference with my property until the matter was resolved. Barrett was served during a Saturday poolside barbecue. Witnesses said he sputtered lemonade through his teeth. HOA meetings turned into gladiator arenas. Residents demanded explanations for legal fees, special assessments, and the newspaper circus. Barrett vilified me as a malcontent farmer with a grudge, which only fueled the recall crowd. I stayed quiet, letting facts speak. Every day the fence remained, the HOA racked up potential damages under the irrigation statute. Behind the scenes, I worked my own brand of malicious compliance. The fence cut off my tractor path, so I petitioned the county for a temporary right-of-way across HOA common space to reach my orchard, citing the obstruction. The county approved. I drove my rickety John Deere straight across the manicured picnic lawn, leaving tire ruts as legal as Sunday church. Kids cheered. Barrett watched from the clubhouse window, purple with frustration. The board retaliated by turning off the clubhouse water whenever they predicted I'd irrigate, hoping to deny me pressure. What they didn't know, my well pump drew from an independent power line and fed a 5,000-gallon cistern behind the shed. I watered twice as long, and Lila sent the board a polite letter noting that tampering with agricultural water supply carries criminal penalties. The water mysteriously turned back on. The day before the court hearing, Barrett tried a final gambit. He offered to compromise by leasing the fenced land back to me for a monthly fee. The audacity left me speechless for half a breath. Then I laughed, told him to put it in writing, and forwarded the email to my attorney as evidence of willful encroachment. We walked into the courthouse on a sticky Thursday. Barrett showed up with 3 attorneys. I had one, Ellery Finch, a soft-spoken property lawyer whose calm felt like bedrock. Justice Lambert took the bench, silver hair and a stern bun. The courtroom AC rattled. Ellery laid out our case: deeds, surveys, irrigation rights, lost income, emotional distress, punitive damages for bad faith actions. Barrett's counsel argued the CCRs granted authority to manage common areas. Justice Lambert asked if they could point to any statute superseding property deeds. They could not. She asked why they ignored setback laws. They mumbled. She asked why they billed me for the fence on land they hadn't proven was theirs. They pivoted to landscaping benefits. After 3 hours, Lambert leaned over her desk. The HOA acted beyond its authority. The fence constitutes trespass and must be removed within 14 days. Plaintiff is awarded treble damages for crop loss and attorney fees. Furthermore, the court refers potential criminal tampering with irrigation infrastructure to the county prosecutor. Barrett's shoulders sagged as if the air left his sails. I almost felt sorry. Almost. But the story wasn't done twisting. As we left, Ellery whispered that Barrett's lawyers hinted they might ignore the removal order while they appealed. If they did, each day would compound damages. I told Ellery to let them dig that hole. I had seeds to plant. 2 days later, a flatbed truck rolled up with workers ready to dismantle the fence. Word spread. Neighbors gathered lawn chairs like it was the 4th of July. I brewed iced tea for everyone and set up a folding table at the property line. The crew foreman handed me the padlock key, muttering, "Wish I worked for you instead." By sunset, the fence lay in neat piles destined for scrap. My goats pranced through the restored pasture, munching grass as if reclaiming a throne. I thought that might be the curtain call, but the side plots were busy blossoming. Marissa submitted the recall petition. Over 60% of residents signed. At the emergency election, Barrett lost his seat by an avalanche. The new board, chaired by a genial architect named Felix, settled the lawsuit before appeal, cutting me a fat check for damages, legal fees, and, in an unexpected twist, offering to pay for my goat's feed for a year as goodwill. I accepted the check, declined the feed, Maple prefers my hay, and donated part of the settlement to the County 4-H Club. The local paper splashed that across page 1. The prosecutor's office pursued the tampering claim. Barrett pled no contest to a misdemeanor, paid a fine, and was barred from holding any HOA position for 5 years. I learned later he sold his house and moved somewhere with no association at all. Most folks would say that's justice. I say it's equilibrium restored. That autumn, I hosted a harvest potluck in the orchard, the very ground they'd tried to steal. Neighbors sat under twinkle lights strung between apple limbs, listening to a fiddle duo. Kids fed Maple and Comet, who'd become unofficial mascots. I raised my glass of homemade cider and thanked everyone for standing against overreach. We'd proved that property, like freedom, holds when people join hands around it. As the sun sank, fireflies winked over the grass. The orchard smelled of sweet windfall apples, and for the first time in months, the place felt entirely mine again. Felix took the chair the way a careful builder steps onto new scaffolding, testing every rung before trusting it with his weight. The night he was elected, he asked if he could swing by the farm in the morning to see the place without a crowd yelling over it. I made coffee and we walked the path the fence had scarred, now just faint grooves and raw dirt that would green up soon. He crouched beside the old corner stake, oak splinter buried deep that my granddad had hammered around the time color television was still a rumor. "I've read everything," Felix said, touching the wood like it mattered. Even the goofy emails where Barrett tried to rename the Greenbelt the Vista. He wanted his name on a sign. That tracks. He also told the management company to bill you before council even reviewed the plan. "You mean before anyone with a license looked at a map?" Felix sighed. "I can undo the damage that's on paper. What I can't undo is how burned people feel. Burns heal faster when folks see the person who held the match get blistered," I said. "Court already started that." He nodded and surprised me. "We'll make repairs, seed, soil, whatever you want. And I'm proposing a bylaw change. Anything touching a boundary needs written consent from that owner, plus a 2/3 vote, no more we thought moments." The cynical part of me twitched, but my gut liked Felix. He asked about Maple and Comet like they were town elders. He wrote down everything, even when I apologized for sounding bossy about field grass. And when he left, he carried a list titled, "Do fix ruts, return soil to grade, plant Timothy, gift Jonah 10 native saplings as apology." Felix believed in lists. 2 mornings later, I heard a truck pull up. Cade, the contractor who'd installed the fence, stood by the tailgate looking like he'd slept in a gravel pile. His orange shirt was gone, replaced by a plain gray hoodie. He held out a canvas bag. "I owe you," he said, "and you gave me the padlock key. That was decent." "Not enough." He glanced over his shoulder like someone might be filming him. "I quit over this job. The foreman told us they had the permit. They didn't. I only found out after your article. My dad's the one who taught me to check lines twice. He'd haunt me if I let it slide." Cade opened the bag and pulled out a blue binder, plastic sleeves, tabs labeled things like plan, budget, emails. He set it on my workbench like a guilty offering. "This is a copy of the job folder the management company gave us. Someone scribbled notes on the margins and they aren't kind to you. There's also an email where Barrett says, and I quote, 'We just need to get a fence up before he can get a lawyer.'" It smelled wrong. I slid the binder toward me. "Is it legal for you to give me this? I made copies of stuff they gave me. I'm part of the paper trail. If somebody sues, I'll tell the truth under oath." Cade gave a half smile. "Also, there's a vendor invoice they changed. We bid 15 grand. The board approved a beautification budget of 30. The extra went to the management company's consulting fee. People should know." He left with a handshake that felt like the start of an honest friendship. When the door closed, I set the binder in the middle of the table and called Ellery. Lawyers love tabs. He asked me not to read it alone. I compromised by making a sandwich first. Then we sat shoulder to shoulder, turning pages like we were diffusing something. The emails were a treasure chest of arrogance, a chain from Barrett to the management company. "Push this through. He's just a hobby farmer." A reply. "Fence contractor says property line is ambiguous. Recommend proceed and ask forgiveness." A note from the treasurer, Seraphine. "Will budget excess as community enhancement to avoid owner notice threshold." Ellery whistled softly. "If this is accurate, it's a gift from the heavens. We're not just talking trespass anymore. We're talking bad faith, conversion, and maybe fraud against their own members." "The prosecutor already has them on tampering," I said. "Do they have an appetite for more?" "They might if we package it well." Ellery snapped photos with his phone, time-stamped, meticulously angled to capture headers. "We should also consider a slander of title count for that lien they recorded. It clouded your property. You're entitled to damages beyond the settlement." I thought of the certified letter that had threatened a lien over a fence I didn't ask for. I thought of all the people who'd paid dues trusting the board to be better grown-ups than this. "Do it," I said. "But make it surgical. I want accountability, not a crater." Ellery nodded. "You might also file a quiet title action to shut the door on any future Greenbelt fantasies." The phrase quiet title felt like a quilt pulled over a cold problem. "Do that too." By afternoon, Ellery had fired off a letter to Felix, who called within the hour. "I want this cleaned up," Felix said. "Give me until the next board meeting. If I don't have a plan you can live with, do your worst." I told him about the binder. He didn't flinch. "Bring it to me. If management skimmed, I'll make a police report myself." That night, under the kitchen light my grandfather had wired long before electrical code became a book, I opened an old cigar box from the pantry. Inside was a roll of surveyor's ribbon I'd saved from when I planted the orchard. I cut 10 short lengths and tied them around the lowest branches of my oldest trees. Each ribbon felt like a tiny flag of intent, mine. Not because a court said so, because there's a difference between paper rights and the kind you earn hauling water in July. The ribbons fluttered when the wind moved. The first curveball flew in from a direction I hadn't expected. The county floodplain office. A woman named Adrian called to ask whether any excavation had happened near the seasonal creek at the south edge of my place. I told her about the fence and how the crew had driven posts right over a shallow swale the county maps mark to carry overflow when storms stack up. "We've had complaints from downstream owners," she said. "A backyard flooded after that fence went in. If your fence is gone, that's one less obstruction, but we're tracing approvals." "HOA never got a permit," I said. Adrian's sigh sounded like a file drawer closing. "That would explain why it wasn't in our system. Could you email any photos you took of the fence line?" I did. 2 weeks later, I learned the county fined the association for obstruction of a drainage easement. The number wasn't astronomical, but it was public, and it pinched right across the bruise where residents already felt abused. Felix didn't fight it. He posted the notice and invited questions. Seraphine resigned the same day, leaving her treasurer laptop on the clubhouse porch like a teenager dropping off a borrowed textbook. Word drifted that she'd taken a deal to avoid charges if she cooperated. I pictured the binder on someone else's table, lighting up the same way it did mine. With the board shaken, I aimed at something constructive. My orchard had a ragged fence of its own, old cedar posts and baling wire. I decided to tear it out and build trellises using the reclaimed metal from the HOA's fence. Petty? Maybe. Efficient? Extremely. Cade offered to help, not for pay, just to make something good from something stupid. We spent 2 Saturdays welding panels into sturdy frames, then set them in concrete footers with a care we didn't rush. Maple supervised from the shade, chewing cud like a foreman watching apprentices. Neighbors drifted over with lemonade and unsolicited advice. Community without a meeting agenda. A kid named Bryce asked if he could help, and by lunch he could tack a panel as straight as a plumb line. Felix showed up in boots and a button-down. The man was incapable of dressing fully practical, and shoveled without complaint. At the end of the day, we stepped back to see a double row of trellises sparkling in the dusk. I hung the first tag with a Sharpie, Trellis 1, formerly Greenbelt. Folks laughed for the right reason. I slept that night like someone who had hammered his frustration into useful shapes. The next thread unraveled when a certified envelope arrived from the title company. Back when the lien had been a threat, I'd reached out to ask whether they'd insure me without exception. They'd gone quiet after the court order. Now a manager named Ophelia wrote to say they had received a cloud notice from the HOA's management company, claiming equitable interest over the disputed strip. My jaw clenched on equitable. It was the kind of word people in nice shoes used when they wanted your lunch and thought saying it in Latin made it polite. I called Ellery, who was already working the slander of title angle. "This is perfect," he said. "It proves publication to third parties. We'll attach it to the complaint." We filed the case 2 days later. I wasn't after another payday so much as a legal broom to sweep the corners. The judge assigned, different from Justice Lambert, looked like he'd been a ranch kid once, an old scar on his knuckle visible when he tapped the bench with his pen. He read our motion, skimmed the exhibits, and issued a show cause order. The management company had to explain why it recorded or circulated any claim after the court said the land was mine. They folded fast. Their lawyer argued miscommunication, a junior analyst over-flagging. The judge looked unconvinced and set a hearing. 2 days before the date, they requested mediation. We sat in a bland office with a window view of a parking lot and negotiated what I wanted from the beginning. A recorded release stating unequivocally that neither the HOA nor its agents had any right, claim, or interest in any inch of my land. They paid a modest sum that covered my fees and a little insult tax. I took the check and asked the mediator to write into the agreement that the management company would fund a property law training session for the new board. The mediator blinked. "We can do that." Felix attended with a dozen neighbors. Lila sat in the front row, arms crossed, nodding like a satisfied judge. It was the quietest kind of revenge, making the people who'd ignored the rules sit and learn them. While the big gears of court and board were turning, smaller dramas spun at ground level. Mona, a neighbor 2 streets over who had once campaigned with Barrett for stricter porch decor rules, decided my harvest potluck had set a precedent for noise events. She began calling the non-emergency line whenever kids squealed or a fiddler tuned up in my orchard. The responding deputy learned pretty quick to park at the corner and just wave. One Sunday, she parked her SUV across my driveway at dusk to talk about the hours. I walked out with 2 pieces of pie on paper plates because my grandmother taught me that carrying food calms most storms. Mona started talking before I even handed her the dessert. Something about quiet enjoyment and our property values and how you attract the wrong crowd. I held the plates level and nodded until she ran out of steam. "Mona," I said gently, "you know the county noise ordinance, right? It allows normal agricultural sounds until 10 p.m. on weekends. And the right to farm law protects farm-related gatherings. We're done by 9, we pick up our trash. You can come by and dance or you can file more complaints, but the outcomes will be the same." She took the pie and looked at it like I had slipped logic inside the crust. "I'll speak to my attorney," she said. "Do," I said. "Send them the case number from the fence thing. It'll save them time." She ate the pie leaning against her car and left without blocking the driveway again. A week later, she surprised me by bringing a sack of apples she said she couldn't use. We both pretended that was all it was. Meanwhile, the seasonal creek had a different problem. A family of beavers decided my corner of the county map needed a civil engineering project. I found the beginnings of a dam tucked into the reeds like a beaver's version of a sticky note. I'd rather coexist than remove wildlife, so I called the state biologist. A man named Cricket, no last name like a musician, came out with a truck full of gadgets and a patient smile. He suggested a flow device, a pipe through the dam that keeps water at a steady level so the beavers stop adding height. We installed it with gloved hands while Maple watched, disappointed that none of it was edible. Cricket thanked me for calling early. "Most folks don't notice until they're waiting," he said. "You're eligible for a small cost-share grant for doing it the right way." The grant covered materials. The dam stayed, the water flowed, and downstream neighbors called me community MVP like it was a sports league. It felt like balance after months of seesawing between court filings and hot tempers. Some consequences took their time arriving. The county auditor completed a review of the association's last 2 years of expenses, routine in the wake of sanctions. What I heard, then confirmed in a public memo, curled my toes. The board had approved a suite of beautification projects that never existed outside of invoices. Overbilling, double entries, and one memorable line item labeled wildlife corridor signage that seemed to hide the fence overage. Felix called a special meeting. He posted every document on the clubhouse bulletin board and read through the mess like a principal leading school assembly after a cafeteria food fight. Residents asked calm, pointed questions. A few older folks cried. They'd served on boards back when neighbor meant something bigger than paint swatches. In the end, the association voted to pursue restitution from the former management firm and bar them from future contracts. Seraphine returned to the clubhouse with a notebook and gave a statement to police. Barrett, miles away according to gossip, didn't appear. What did show up, months later, was a check from the firm's insurer that covered a portion of the misused funds. Not victory, but maybe the first repayment of a debt that had more to do with trust than dollars. I hauled the last shard of that cursed fence from my pasture, a concrete nub the size of a loaf, and stacked it on my hill of relics. A bent horseshoe, a glass-stoppered bottle, other odd survivors. With a nail, I scratched today's date into the dust, not their monument, our proof of endurance. Peace lasted a week. A developer in gleaming boots showed Felix glossy plans for a community trail behind my orchard. Felix, wiser, told him consent needed my name. The salesman arrived, pitching wellness and rising values. I pictured strangers' flashlights sweeping fruit at midnight. "No," I said. He offered upkeep, solar lights, even a bench with my grandfather's name. "Trails invite dogs, coyotes, and trash," I explained. He hinted at a vote. "Consensus doesn't trespass," I replied. We shook hands. He left muttering that I turned trouble into architecture. My recycled wire trellises flashed agreement. Winter settled like blank paper. The orchard slept, goats grew thick coats, and the board passed the boundary consent bylaw. I recorded a quiet title order and tucked it into Granddad's cigar box. The title company sent a clean policy and an apologetic note. At Christmas, Cade brought fudge and news. He'd launched his own fencing crew, donating materials to local farms, and wanted photos of my trellises. Mistake to masterpiece. I okayed the brag and warned the fudge might start riots. Spring melt uncovered a brass survey cap older than my father near the eastern stake. Alessio almost sprinted over. The monument matched the deed within inches. He shot photos like it was a celebrity fossil. "Lawsuits wobble," he said, "but steel and brass stay true." Neighbors filled the calm with better ideas: a Saturday tool share, a bus stop library, volunteers mowing for the millers when heat hit triple digits. Felix asked me to redo enforcement rules, swap punish for resolve. We wrote a new step before any fine, visit and talk. Consent, consent, consent. The vote passed. Even Mona, once my loudest critic, said yes. The management firm funded a property law workshop. Their new rep admitted operational gaps. No one jeered. We just took notes. On the anniversary of the stolen post, we planted 10 native saplings. Kids tied name tags to twigs, someone brought cake with sugar fences, Maple licked frosting. The reporter shot a follow-up photo. Same angle, no fence, and asked for a quote. I muttered something about patience and stubborn kindness. Then the epilogue. Attorney Trevor, a silent neighbor, served me a demand for records. He was suing the ex-management firm and Barrett to claw back misused cash. I was the star witness. Lila poured coffee. You were ready to stand alone, but you never were. We boxed every photo and receipt. Deposition day felt surreal. Stiff chairs, looping questions. I spoke of thudding posts, crying goats, and concrete biting soil. Afterwards, I walked between the trellises and let a quieter pride settle, the kind that makes you latch a gate twice. 3 months later, the court's consent judgment landed. The firm repaid every padded cent. Barrett covered fees, half the fence cost, and a misconduct penalty big enough to dent his retirement. Nobody cheered his ruin, but the ledger balanced. Trevor spent the recovered money like a teacher uses extra chalk, carefully where folks could see it. Dues dipped, the clubhouse roof got fixed, and an annual audit line appeared. Felix called it sunlight insurance. Lila reminded everyone audits beat lawsuits. Autumn painted the sky peach. My saplings rooted, the beaver pipe gurgled. Maple and Comet produced twins. Pickle and Jellybean, so named by second graders with paper ballots. While I strung lights for the harvest potluck, Mona arrived with community garden flyers. She wanted compost lessons. I demanded she outgrow my tomatoes. She laughed. The potluck reclaimed every decibel the HOA once tried to fine. Quilts spread on grass, a welding arch framed the orchard gate, and Felix, still overdressed, offered a toast. May our rules begin with kindness, and our fences stay where they belong. Someone rang a cowbell, children cheered, Pickle bleated. Next dawn I gathered cups, paused at Alessio's brass monument, and let my fingers rest on cool metal. Boundaries, I thought, aren't really fences or papers. They're the quiet certainty of where you stand and the louder courage to stay when shoved. I whistled. Maple trotted up, Jellybean at her heels, Pickle tangled in my laces. Freeing him, I looked over fields indisputably, legally and peacefully, mine. Somewhere cider waited, and friends would finish it. Pride warmed me, solid as a stone in a good pair of jeans, right where it belongs. That concrete pile isn't much to look at, just a lopsided cone of memories behind the pasture gate, but each scrap carries a story. The horseshoe belonged to a plow team retired before I was born. The bottle surfaced the spring we rebuilt the footbridge, and now the fence chunk crowns the heap like the full stop of a stubborn book. Every pass I rap it with my boot to hear the dull ring that says, "Still gone." Felix later said the developer kept tweaking his drawings, hoping I'd yield. I never saw them. Instead, I spent December evenings threading old Christmas lights through the trellises, letting blue and green bulbs glow against bare vines. Drivers slowed and waved at the art project, never guessing it was farm junk lit for equal parts spite and cheer. When the workshop met, the room smelled of burnt coffee and fresh toner. The instructor, a retired judge, slapped a rolled fence permit on the table. Paper is only power when it's the right paper. Laughter broke the tension, and by recess, 3 board members volunteered to build a digital archive, so no one could plead ignorance again. During deposition prep, Ellery drilled dates into me until they felt like phone numbers. He warned that counsel would weaponize silence, so I practiced staring at a kitchen timer for 5 seconds without babbling. The exercise worked. Lawyers hate silence even more than goats hate rain. That autumn night beneath a bright harvest moon, gently. Friends, thank you. See you soon.